Good afternoon. My name is Justin Matthews, and I'm a first-year MBA student here at WashU and the co-president of the Entrepreneurship Venture Capital Association. On behalf of the Alumni Association and the Olin School of Business, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Wednesdays with WashU, and we are excited to feature today's guest, Ron Shaich. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Shaich and Doug Villard, whom will be moderating today's event. Ron is the managing partner and CEO of Act 3 Holdings, a $300 million fund that invests in the public and private restaurant and consumer companies that are driving long-term value creation and have the potential to significantly dominate their market niches. He is also the founder and former chairman and CEO of Panera Bread, a groundbreaking restaurant brand that today has more than 2,400 bakery cafes and 120,000 associates in nearly $6 billion in annual system-wide sales. Ron has been recognized repeatedly for his visionary leadership. In 2020, he was listed as one of Boston's most influential people by Boston Magazine. In 2018, he was named Restaurant Leader of the Year by Restaurant Business. In 2017, he received the Legend in Leadership Award from the Chief Executive Leadership Institute at the Yale School of Management. He was also named the second most influential leader in the restaurant industry by Nation's Restaurant News in 2017 Power List. Ron is also the co-founder of No Labels, an organization that promotes bipartisan political problem solving and the development of a long-term strategic plan for the country. Ron received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Clark University, a Master of Business Administration degree from Harvard Business School. He is also the recipient of an Honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree from Clark University. Mr. Shaich will be interviewed by Doug Villard. Doug is a professor of practice in entrepreneurship and the academic director for the Entrepreneurship Association at the Olin School of Business. He started out his early career at Disney before becoming a serial entrepreneur, starting, selling, buying, advising, and investing in companies. Doug was the co-founder and president of Second Street Media Solutions, Inc., and the co-founder and co-CEO of Villard Growth Partners. Doug joined WashU in 2021. Doug, Ron, welcome.
Thanks, Justin. Ron, welcome back to St. Louis.
Thank you, Doug. We lived here for quite some time.
Yeah, quite some time. And congratulations to your son, Michael, who's graduating from WashU in just a couple of weeks. Where's Michael? And all of his friends who are probably graduating too. Congratulations to you all too. Okay, so I've got Ron Shaich on stage with me right now. And I'm thinking about, I was asking my business students how to ask the first question of you. Okay, so this is interesting. So my business—
This was a serious—
serious question. Right? Well, this is maybe a capitalistic question, but my business students, like the serious business students, are thinking, someday, like in my wildest dreams as a business student, maybe I would come up with a compelling idea for a business, and maybe I would get some funding for it, and maybe I would find some customers, and maybe that would go really well. And then maybe I would buy some more, maybe I would take it public, maybe I would run that company for a decade, maybe I would take a break for a second, then come back and run it for another decade.
Or
two. Maybe I'd get it up to billions of dollars in revenue. Maybe I would then sell it for billions of dollars. And then maybe I would go and create a private equity company and buy a bunch more and try to do it all over again in a bigger way. This guy did that. This guy did that. So congratulations on that. Just amazing, amazing accomplishment. So how does that feel? And then you get invited back to be on stage, or invited to be on stage. How does that feel?
You know, to me, it feels like a life, and a life is a journey. And so I never set out to do that. I actually set out to make a difference. And I found that business was one of the most powerful ways in the world to make a difference. And I kept doing it. And I carried a sense of responsibility. I see some old friends of mine here I'd worked with, a sense of responsibility to, the 120,000 people in Panera, the billions of dollars of investor capital that was in there, the customers. And you keep listening to that and responding. And I always found I love solving problems. And I found no better way to do it with my life. And I almost feel, it was a lovely introduction, but it wasn't any of that. That actually was what was the payoff. The payoff was the opportunity to actually figure things out, put yourself on the line, and have a palpable sense of solving things. And I would just conclude by saying, I feel blessed, not from what came out, but for the chance to have that life. Business is one of the few places where you actually can create your own mini society. You can put yourself on the line and see what you do. And you can actually figure out, how do you touch people? And so I feel very blessed.
Well, congratulations. And so the same student could have it a little bit wrong, because they could be thinking, I don't know. They could be thinking about money or fame or accomplishment.
Sure.
But I mean, if you give them some advice, because if you chase that, what would happen?
Well, Doug and I were talking at lunch with a group of people. And I've long held what I'm about to share with you, which is, if you go into, I started with one restaurant, and I ended up with a $7.5 billion company, and we're doing it again. And if you go into it to accomplish that, you will never get there. Because if you don't love the doing of the doing, it doesn't have the joy, and you don't have the capacity to really do what matters, which is to figure it out and touch people. And so I would say over and over to folks, I used to say, if in a sense of Panera, if you don't love drinking a beer with the bakers, if you don't love the people of it, you're not going to get there. And I'd say it to folks that are students, right? The end is not the job. The end is not whether you make $10,000 more or less next year. The end is starting down a path of your life's work where you figure out what brings you joy, and you figure out where you can actually go home at night and feel like I made a difference.
And and we'll go from entrepreneurship to running these companies to where you are. But in the subject of entrepreneurship, how do you think about that? Like, how do you think about being entrepreneurial? Did you always see yourself as entrepreneurial? How do you think about that?
Actually, I'm going to push you back, Doug.
Okay.
All right. I would argue we often try to bifurcate, even in our school, business and life. And to me, business is actually, and entrepreneurship in particular, is a subset of a broader issue of how do you live a life of meaning? And this is a canvas, an opportunity to do it. What you didn't say in the introduction, I went to college, and I came to college a political science major. I was really interested in government, and I left to go to the Harvard Business School. And for me, my university experience was about transition and about learning about myself. And I had an opportunity to create a nonprofit convenience store for the student body when I was in college. And for a kid who couldn't dance and sing, I discovered that business was the most creative thing I knew. It was the equivalent of live performance art. And whether you're an entrepreneur and you're seeing opportunities, seizing opportunities, and going out and doing something with it, or if you're an executive in a large corporation, in all those cases, there's all this opportunity for creativity. There's all this opportunity to make decisions and make a difference. And to me, that's all a subset of having a life. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that, but I want to bring this discussion back to, how do you have a life of value and meaning, not simply how do you have a career.
Awesome. Well said. So I'm going to ask you a career question, and you can shift it around.
Oh, good. Yes.
I'm just teasing.
No, I'm going to answer wherever I want to go anyways, Doug. We both know that.
So let's talk about Panera. Let's talk about Panera for a second.
Sure.
it wasn't when you first discovered it, it wasn't called Panera, and it wasn't what it is today. What was the potential that you saw and where it started?
Well, let's talk about it for a second. Let me try to construct for you what Panera really represented. And again, it's always seen when it's always seen in terms of the numbers or the value creation. That's what business people want to talk about. But that's not at all what it amounted to for me. What it amounted to and what made that company was 4 times we transformed it, changed it. When it started, it was a croissant shop back in Boston called Au Bon Pain. And the first transformation, every transformation comes from learning. What you want to focus on is how to learn, how to think, how to recognize patterns, how to see people. That's what entrepreneurs do. Just to go off for a second, we're not capitalists, we're opportunists in the sense of seeing an opportunity. And that first learning, that first transformation, I used to have customers that would walk in and they'd say to me, I want that baguette. And I'd say, sure. And I start to slice it as you slice a baguette like this. And they say, no. Slice it the other way. Slice it from top to bottom. I'd pull out, I'd hand them the bread. They pull out a bag of luncheon meats from Schnucks and they throw it on the piece of bread. And you didn't have to be a brilliant marketeer with a WashU MBA to recognize maybe there was an opportunity in sandwiches, not just bread. And so the first transformation of this broken down little company was to say, maybe we want to be a bakery cafe and not just a croissant and bread shop. And that was really the first thing that led to the transformation. The second, we took that ended up growing. It ended up becoming a dominant player. We took it public in 1991. Around 93, it was already starting to get pedestrianized. And in 93 was the second major learning and transformation. And I could feel it, and I began traveling around the country, and I was trying to listen. And I began to discover there was a phenomena that I used to call in business terms decommodification, or a drive for specialness. Go backwards, post-World War II, every product in America was local. By the 1980s and 90s, every industry had been consolidated, commodified, oligopolies. You look at beer, it was Anheuser-Busch and Miller. Coffee, it was Maxwell House and Folgers. You can think about soft drinks, Coke and Pepsi. And what you began to see in the 80s was a deeper trend. People were beginning to reject this mass market. They wanted to feel special in a world in which they weren't. And I could see it playing out in the bakery industry. I could see it playing out in food. I started to see in restaurants, people would walk in and they'd walk into a fast food place. Maybe not everybody, but 1 in 3, and they'd hold their noses. And I began to say, how do we give them something more? And what was that? What did they really want? What it was clear to me is they wanted self-respect, because as fast food had become commodified, 60,000 locations with drive-thrus. I used to call it nutritional cocaine. The quickest way to inject nutrition was to hit the drive-thru. What were they? Self-service gasoline stations for the human body. And we began to say, hey, there's an opportunity to serve those people. Let's change the currency. If the currency of fast food is a lot of food for not a lot of money, let's transition it to real food, environments that actually engage people, not make them feel uncomfortable, people that actually care. And ultimately, instead of just selling a lot of food for a little bit of money, sell your own sense of self, your self-esteem, for a little bit more money. That was a powerful understanding. I didn't realize it at the time, but that became what they now call fast casual, which is a $60 billion segment, the growth segment in the restaurant industry. I did it. The folks at Starbucks, my friend Howard Schultz, the folks at Chipotle, they came afterwards. But that was a different paradigm, and I could feel it. I saw that opportunity, and we had bought what had been the St. Louis Bread Company. I said, this is a place to apply those principles. And we rebuilt the St. Louis Bread Company around those principles, and then named it Panera everywhere else other than St. Louis, which later I'll tell you the story of why we did that. But that was the second transformation. And then we just played it out until essentially 1999. And 1999 was another moment of truth, another moment of learning and transformation. I'm on a beach in the Caribbean, and I'm feeling bummed. And one of the things about business creation is you're always going to have these moments of doubt and these moments of uncertainty and these questioning. If you don't understand what it takes to create. And I was sitting there going, we have this powerful thing in Panera. It's the third of 4 divisions of a large public company. There are professional managers running every one. We only have so much capital. What do we do? And I began to think about it. And I said, if we don't get this right, if we don't get the capital and the people, we're going to screw this thing up. And the truth is, this thing, Panera, was only 180 stores. It has the potential to be a nationally dominant brand, but we're going to screw it up. And I was talking to somebody, and this friend looked at me and said, Ron, what would you do if Panera owned Au Bon Pain International, the manufacturing division? What would you do? I said, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. If I were smart, I would monetize every other asset, take all that capital, put it against Panera and its growth, and I'd go down there myself and I'd make it happen. And I'm the kind of person that if I say I'm going to do something, I go and do it. And I sat and I marinated with it for a couple of months, and I said, I'm going to go do it. Michael was just born. I disrupted my family. We all came down to St. Louis and began to play with it. And I made the decision to sell every other business but Panera, take that capital and the best people and come down here. And that was, at the time, it seems like the stock was up 100-fold from that moment. It seems like a smart thing. But for the year and a half of all of those transactions, it was hell. It was horrible. I was selling, sorry, Michael, my first child. Okay? Au Bon Pain was my first child. And I loved the people that were in it. I really, and fortunately they left or they were sold. And then when their non-competes were over, they came back. But that's what we were going through. And that's what that kind of transaction, that's what change is about. And it was horrible. Now today it looks great, but going through it, it was so tough. That was 99. And then again, we just built it out and grew it from 99 to 2010. And I stepped back and I wanted to do some political work. I did something here in Boston called Panera Care, in Clayton called Panera Cares. It was an experiment that I wanted to see play out. We can again talk about that. But I was out for about a year and a half, and I was building this thing called No Labels, helping build it. And I came back, I was still the largest shareholder. I was still doing all the customer facing work and some acquisitions. And my friend Bill Morton took over as CEO. And I came back one weekend from a trip to San Francisco, and I began to imagine, I asked myself a question. How would I compete with Panera if I weren't the chairman of Panera? Actually, how would I screw with it? And you could figure out what I really wanted to say. Okay? How could I screw with Panera? How would I compete with it? And I ended up writing a vision that included digital. This was 2011. Loyalty, omnichannel, which included delivery and the like, and then clean food. And I brought it into Bill Morton, my friend who had become CEO. I said, Bill, what do you think? And he said, Ron, this is great. Will you go work on it? And this guy who had just retired as CEO, maybe a year and a half years, I found myself working 30, 40, and then 60 hours a week creating this vision. And at the end of a year of working on that prototype, I loved it. I didn't have the ceremonial duties of CEO. And Bill basically came to me and said he had an issue. He couldn't travel. Would I come back as CEO? And I ended up coming back as CEO and putting that vision in place. And I transformed the company once again. And again, it all sounds beautiful in retrospect as you write the story, but it was horrible. Right? Some of the folks here went through it with me. We had activist investors in the middle of it who kept saying to me, why are you spending $150, $200 million on technology? What's this? We could buy it cheaper. Why are you doing that? Well, why don't we cut the costs and we'll dividend it out or we'll buy back stock? Why don't you do that? And the truth is, when you're going through transformation, which is really where the joy comes from and the pain, when you're going through that, nothing is proven until it's done. And you got to carry that with you. Fortunately, by 2017, it had really succeeded. Comp store sales were up substantially, mid to high single digits. EBITDA was up like 30, 35%. And we ended up having an opportunity. People approached us, and we ended up in the largest US restaurant deal ever done at that point, at the second highest multiples. And again, I want to say to you, the lesson of that is that what business is, much like life, is about learning and then acting and then ultimately understanding whether you got it right or not, figuring it out.
But you know, a lot of us in our careers, we have choices to make for our career. We're going to do this or we're going to do that. When you're doing this, you've got a bunch of employees, you got a bunch of shareholders, you have stakeholders, you have all these things, and you're going to make a big change like that.
Yeah.
It worked, but what does that feel like when you're doing that?
Like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. I mean, that's the reality. It's not the glamour. This is hard. It's difficult if you care. It really is. I was telling somebody, you know, I can remember when we took this last transformation of Panera, and it was 2015. I was in the middle of it. We were spending, as I said, hundreds of millions of dollars on the technology. At that point, we referred to technology as the social security of Panera. It was only a matter of time to, like the US budget, like Social Security in the US budget, our technology function would represent 100% of all of our revenues. I mean, that was the cost. And we knew it, and we were going through it. And I can remember I would get up and make a speech to, well, the Grand Ole Opry, 5,000 people. And I'd think, my God, these guys are all following me. They got their mortgages on the line, their kids' education, their lives. We better be right here. You know, I can remember going to investors and saying, you know, stick with me through the activists, hang here, right? And quite frankly, you know, that sense of responsibility to them. And I can remember driving out on Starro Drive in Boston and thinking to myself, boy, it'd be, you know, it'd just be easier if I had a heart attack. And when I say that, I didn't mean I wanted to commit suicide, or it was the powerful sense of responsibility. And that's what running, if you're going to be good, it requires a sense of responsibility to all those folks that are believing in you. And so when I tell you this, I tell you that because the joy comes when you put yourself on the line. If you're not willing to put yourself on the line and have some of that pain, you will never know how good you are and what you're capable of. And that, frankly, is, to me, a life of meaning. And a life of meaning comes in testing yourself and walking away saying, I can do that. And I would wish that for all the students here. They have that sense that you can handle what comes down the pike.
Well, it's great advice. And it's fun to see you get real, to get emotional about that, and to tell that story. How about we change it up a little bit?
Sure.
You walk into Panera, what do you order?
All right, I know this is on the internet, but they've taken everything I like off the menu. Bums. I would have answered that with a Thai chicken salad or a chicken frontega, but it's as far as I can go.
And how, you know, those of us in St. Louis, we watched this happen. We were proud, very proud that it originated here and watching it grow. But there are all these things that you did that we take for granted now, like, I don't know, like a place you could go to have a meeting, right? You know, that before it was sit-down restaurants or it was fast food, and here's this place we can go to have a meeting. This place that has free Wi-Fi. You know, where did those? I mean, these are just things we're used to now. But where did they come from?
I mean, let's tell you the story of the gathering place and the environment. And it happened 2 miles away from here, across from the Esquire Theater. There was a bread company right there. And we had an office across the street. I'd walk in and it would be 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And you'd see people sitting around in the bread company. And I'm I want to learn. So I'd go and talk to people. And I go up to them and say, hey, I'm Ron Shaich. I'm the CEO here. I'd love to ask you, why did you come in here today? And I can remember I walked up to a table and there were 4 people sitting at the table. And there were 4 guys, and I said, why are you here today? They said, we work up at the plant up the road. We wanted a place to sit and talk. And then I saw a woman. She had paper spread out in front of her. And I said, excuse me, ma'am, I'm Ron Shaich. Why are you here? She said, I teach at the parochial school. I needed a place to do my lesson plan. And then I remember there was a guy sitting in the corner. He had the Post-Dispatch open, the sports pages. And I walk up to him and said, what are you doing here? He says, I had a doctor's appointment. He said, I sure as hell am not going back to the office, and I'm not going home and seeing my wife. And he's sitting there reading and catching a breath. And I thought to myself, if we could create an environment in which people wanted to sit, seems pretty obvious, the price of admission becomes the food. Right? We create something that, if we can't sell you food when you're in that restaurant and it's 15 feet away from you, we have failed. And so it really came, again, from pattern recognition and hearing it and seeing it and feeling it. Wi-Fi came, and so we then built, that was Esquire, we built that first real cafe. We built it up in Illinois, but right here in University City, down the street, we built one of the very first Paneras, St. Louis bread companies, with the fireplace and the whole thing. And that then became a model for the gathering place. And Wi-Fi, similarly, you'd walk in and you see these people sitting there. And, our friends at Starbucks had, the model at that point was everybody was charging for Wi-Fi. I think it was like $14.95 and you could get the T-Mobile pass. And I started to think, hey, we got all these seats because we have them for lunch. My goal is to turbocharge that asset. So what can I do at breakfast to get them in there and get them excited? What can I do in the late afternoon to get them excited? What can I do to create an environment that people wanted to be there? And I thought to myself, this Wi-Fi, which is emerging, if we could provide it, and I thought it would ultimately have, nobody would charge for it. If we could provide it, we had an opportunity to create a strategic competitive advantage. To me, that's what business is about, differentiation and competitive advantage. We could create that. And I thought our friends at Starbucks who were charging for it, because they didn't have the seats, they couldn't match it. And in fact, we really were again, trying to build a barrier to entry. We would be causing a problem for their business model, because their business model essentially said, we're going to finance the whole Wi-Fi by charging that $14.95. And so if they matched us on price, they were going to fill their restaurants the worst times, and it was going to be problematic. And it would create a barrier to entry. So we rolled it out. I can remember I had franchisees who would say, what do we need this Wi-Fi for $200? I'd say, give it a chance. Just, and so what is that about? It's about, we keep talking about learning and then transforming. Learning is about figuring out today what's going to matter tomorrow, and then making sure you are there when the future unfolds. That's what business is about. That's what your life is about. Figure out what's going to matter to you tomorrow. What when you're 5 years from now and 10 years from now, and build your life around it. If you're running a business or you're doing a startup, figure out what's going to matter to you a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and make sure that your business is there. And the real question I would be teaching, if I may say, Mr. Professor, is how do we listen and learn? How do we develop those skills of empathy to see the patterns and to get there before our competitors get there?
So it's funny you should talk about empathy, because as an entrepreneurship professor, that is lesson 101. But if I listen to you for a moment, and I think about that, how many of these great ideas were like epiphanies to you, like you genius drew them up on the board, versus you were seeing them in real life and converted them? What's that ratio for you?
I actually think it's almost all, it sort of grows within you. I don't think it's like this magical moment that you get a bolt of lightning. I think you start to see patterns. And the really important skill is to stay present. We all want to rush to action. And it's a very male thing. We men in particular want to go do something. When the reality is what matters most is figuring out what's going to matter And being able to, we were talking like being able to bring that down to a short list so that there's real clarity. What's going to matter? And being right about that. And once you've got that, then you go. And so my primary argument or my suggestion when you're thinking about a business is to focus on understanding and learning. And all I can tell you is the greatest joy in business for me always was when I finally figured something out and I knew it and could feel it, and the rest of the world didn't get it yet. That was like a powerful feeling that I can't describe. And what you want to do is struggle with that question. Your career is not about getting something done today. It's about knowing what matters and then making sure you do what matters.
You know, and speaking of which, and again, we're watching this play out here in St. Louis and continually watching this innovation. And then you do, and that, if you'll tell us a story, and then you do this Panera Cares thing, which I was trying to figure that out. As you can tell by my line of questioning, business professor, capitalism, but he comes up with this idea of, well, you explain it. Explain Panera Cares. It's fascinating.
Yeah, so I have, you know, I will step back and say, I believe business is one of the most powerful opportunities for social change that exists. Again, we have resources, we have capabilities. And I used to say, imagine if, you know, when Home Depot can help us when we have to move logistically the supplies to a hurricane. Imagine when, you know, our computer companies can help solve the kind of problems that we had at, you know, with at one time the White House Office of Technology. And I've always thought that we in Panera had a set of skills that if we could figure out how to use them in a positive way, it had a benefit to society. And I've always believed when we make a contribution to society, the company itself is the beneficiary. It's for us, not just for the community. And it was 2008, the recession was roaring. And we were, my wife Nancy and I were watching NBC News. You know, we had DVR'd it. It was 11 o'clock at night. And they were talking about a cafe in Denver, Colorado, a community cafe, a cafe of shared responsibility, no set prices. And you essentially, in this cafe, we wanted to give people dignity. You walked in, and if you left what you could leave, if you had more money, you left it. If you had less money, you left it. And I was just stunned by this concept. And I looked at Nancy and I said, Nancy, we open a restaurant every 48 hours, right? We have equipment like you can't imagine. We have capabilities. We could do this. And I said, what do you think? What would happen if we did it? And my first thought was we had a lot of leftover baked goods. We take the leftover baked goods. And then I began to say, no, if we're really going to do this, we got to do it right. We got to do the entire Panera menu and put our name on it. And there was a lot of concern. What's going to happen? This isn't a little community cafe. This is now a major corporation. Are people going to perceive this as free lunch on Uncle Ron? Literally, right? And so the day after I stepped down as CEO, I opened the very first one of these, again, down the street, a hometown store for me in Clayton, which is where we lived. And we opened it and it had almost instant success. And what was amazing to me was that people did the right thing on average, not everybody, but over the course of it, it was in existence for 7, 8 years. We opened 5 of them. We served tens of millions of people. And it was an extraordinary experiment in what people do. And I can report to you, you know, people basically do the right thing. There were some interesting lessons in it. You know, you immediately begin to profile people, and helping our own staff not profile became a question. I can remember it was the second day of this store here in Clayton, and a couple of kids came in and they walked down the aisle, they were laughing, and they said, I'll take 6 smoothies, and I'll take 3 Frontega chickens, and I'll take one of those brownies. And here, I'm going to give you $3 from my dad's credit card. Take it off of there. And you wanted to jump across that counter and whack those kids, right? I mean, you just like, don't you get it? Who do you think you are? Right? And then you'd see somebody come down the line, and you're sure they were the folks that were, they had nothing. The way they were dressed, the way they looked. And they'd leave a $20 bill in the bin. And it became pretty clear we had to actually train our own people not to profile, not to guess, because that's human nature. And to me, it was a fascinating experiment in what people do.
Yeah, so he opens up Panera Cares, uses the brand name too, same exact menu.
Well, Panera supported me in it. I have to be clear,
Yeah.
right? They were extraordinary in allowing us to do this.
Yeah, same exact menu, and as a regular store, not far away.
Mhm.
Like, how do you have the courage to keep doing?
What was, hey, this is the point on all this entrepreneurial stuff. What's the risk? That you're going to fail? Oh my God, that's horrible. Right? You're going to get up and try again. What was the worst thing that was going to happen if Panera Cares didn't work? We close the store and move on. I mean, literally, and I say it to you guys, right? You got great degrees from a serious university. You got an MBA, right? You have an insurance policy. Go and test yourself. Go and follow your dreams. Because if you don't follow them, there's no chance of you getting there. And the risk is so little, especially in our society. It used to be, you had a failure. Today, right? We have, when we hire, we have memories of about 20 minutes. You can do it. Nobody's going to guarantee you can have success. But I can guarantee you, if you don't take a shot at it, there's no chance of success.
So one more question for you, and then I'll take some from the audience and some that have been submitted to me. You took another risk though, too. You took another risk too, in the sense
Wait,
that,
Doug, we got to stop here for a second. I got to correct something. For the audience.
Okay.
I am not a risk taker. No, wait. My son will answer for you, right? I am not a risk taker. Risk takers are folks that are gambling. I will not do anything where I don't have the house vigorous, right? I want to have a competitive advantage, right? When I make an investment, I have knowledge other people don't about where this industry is going, right? One of my partners is here, Chris, right? We know where our industry is going, so we're investing that way. To me, right, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who started as an entrepreneur, right, I can see and feel that opportunity and taste it. And when I can see and feel and taste it, the greatest risk is not protecting that opportunity and making it happen. The guys that take risk are the guys that follow their competitors, don't do anything towards the future, don't break through, and don't have any sense of where the marketplace is going. That's the riskiest thing in the world. You're just throwing a couple of chips on the table. So I want to be clear. I'm an opportunist in the sense of capitalizing on opportunities, not a risk taker.
Okay, well then explain this one to us.
Go, buddy.
Explain this one to us. Recently, no, but up to a certain point, all of business was about maximizing value for shareholders. And all the public markets, all CEOs are going quarter to quarter to get that stock to go up and up and up. And you buck that one too.
Yeah, because it works better thinking long term. I had the most powerful advantage over my competitors. We had a situation where we had the credibility to think and act long term. And many of our competitors were under such short-term pressure that they had to deliver in the next quarter, either by their board or by their shareholders. And the result is we had a lot more options to play. We did this whole Panera 2.0 transformation that we began in like 2011. It wasn't until 2016, 17 that it played out. It was to me, it wasn't a gamble. It was pretty clear what was going to happen. The question is, could we get it done? Here's a good quote for you. Vince Lombardi said, He never lost a game. He just ran out of time.
Mhm.
That's how I experienced it. I knew this was the right stuff. Could we get there? And so what I want to try to say to you is, to me, value creation, which is what we learn in business, shareholder value creation. It's not something you can make. It's a byproduct. Let me explain to you what I mean. And it's a very important, for me, it's an important concept. It's the difference between means, ends, and byproducts. So I have a friend, he's a type 1 diabetic. You may know who this gentleman is, right? His goal in life is to stay alive as long as all of us in the room, as long as me. But he can't make it happen. It's a byproduct. So what's his end? To keep his blood sugar between 80 and 180. What's his means? Diet, exercise, and insulin control. Business is the same thing. People want value creation. You want to do well for your shareholders or your investors, but you don't do that by focusing on that. If you simply focus on that, you never get there. You miss the stuff that matters. So what is the end in business? Being a better competitive alternative. What does it mean to be a better competitive alternative? It ain't complicated. Know who your target customer is. Get them to walk past your competitors to come to you. Have a reason to be the best competitive alternative. Exists for a reason. That's the end. And then most of your work is not on value creation or profit creation. It's actually on doing the things that create differentiation, being a better competitive alternative, and value creation comes out the other side. I'd go further and to say this to you. When I got out of business school in 1978, forever ago, back when I got out of business school, the prevailing mantra, excuse me, professor, was not simply value creation. It was actually responsibility. As a CEO, we had community responsibility to our communities, to our society, to the environments in which, to the communities in which we live, to our customers, to our employees, our team members. And beginning in the 70s with Friedman and Chris Jansen at Harvard Business School, there became this ideology that all the business existed, its only responsibility was value creation in the short term. And the reality is that's a broken concept. Chris Jensen, one of the founders of that view, actually came out later to say, no, it doesn't work. Shareholders in a company, they are more like renting an apartment. They're not owning the apartment. Their name is not on the door. They don't have legal liability. They don't have a responsibility. And I believe that there's a movement, it's called conscious capitalism. It's something I've been involved in. It basically would argue, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, the Business Roundtable spoke to it, you're hearing more of it, is that stakeholder capitalism is the way to create value. Stakeholder capitalism is a longer term view of the world. It says, number one, you're taking care of your guests. Number two, you're taking care of your own people. You can't take care of your guests if you're not taking care of your own people. You're taking care of the community. If you don't make an investment in the community, there's going to be no community here to support you. So I think that increasingly we're saying, certain business leaders are saying, and I promise you it works better if we take a long-term view and we focus on stakeholders, that broad group of stakeholders, we're actually better able to produce value creation for our shareholders.
Wonderful. Leah has a question for you. Leah. You're as a CEO of a public company. What's the best part of that? What's the worst part of that?
Well, I guess they're probably linked. The public part, I think I'm going to focus on, not running a company. I would tell you, you have complete transparency. So there's no hiding. You can't write your own narrative. You can't write your own story. You live in a regulatory environment. Everybody knows everything you're doing. Every competitor knows everything you're doing. There's no place to put the dirty laundry. I mean, to hide it, like when your parents come to visit. You know, it's just simply, it's all out there. And so that visibility in a public company is a large burden. Secondly, you have a broad swatch of investors. So I had investors that were with me on a 5-year vision. And I had investors that only wanted to know what the comp store sales were yesterday so they could trade the stock tomorrow. And you have this whole broad swatch, and you're trying to deal with and ultimately serve all of them. And so I would say, for anybody who asks, I find being public infinitely more difficult. 90% of the people that go public live to regret it. It was great for me, but that doesn't mean that being public is a better condition. It's actually a much tougher condition to run a business and to deal with it. So those were all some of the pains of it. The pleasure of it is that you actually potentially have capital. You have a liquid instrument, which makes you sleep better at night personally. And I think, you have visibility. And if you're out there doing this, I kind of got a kick when we won. And I love that figuring it out and then winning. And it was great. It was hard to get there. It's like a football game, it's a tough game. But when you actually win the championship, it's a wonderful feeling. And being public has those elements to it.
Ivan asks, Ivan says, I'll paraphrase it. Ivan says, I'm late in my career.
He's 23.
He's late in his career, and he has a really good idea for a startup, but he couldn't imagine, leaving his job or risking it or whatever. What does he do?
Call me. I talk to people all the time with great ideas. By the way, one of the funny stories, I used to get 30, 40, 50 comments a week from people saying, Panera should do this, Panera should do that, right? And the trick is they're all right. But the job of being a CEO is to figure out what 3 or 4 things you're going to bet on. Because when you're the CEO, you can get many things done, but you can't get very much done. So my comment to you is when you have a great idea, maybe the answer to it isn't that we're going to now create the next Apple computer. Maybe the answer isn't that sort of grand slam big idea that everybody wants and everybody's searching for, because they have these stories of the people who get there. I would argue the really valuable things are not these huge, change the world, great ideas, but the small innovations you can make in your own life. And the small things you can do where you see opportunity. Maybe that's in your career, maybe that's in your relationships. What are the ways in which if you're asking yourself the question, this can perform better, I can do a better job, whatever I'm working on can do it better. And to me, this whole entrepreneurial process is so much less about the big idea and the big score, so much less about that than it is about a process of listening and empathy and learning and seeing opportunity wherever it is in front of you and choosing to follow that path and letting you see where it takes you.
Judith asks a tough question. She says, when you're in the restaurant industry, especially when you own a whole bunch of them, and it has to do with workers and has to do with wages. So she's asking, how do we pay these folks enough to have a real life, but yet you stay competitive?
Yeah, it's a thing that used to wake me up all the time. I used to say, could I live on what we pay? And if you really care, you ask those questions in an authentic way. You don't just push it away. I never fully answered that question. What I did do is we have a number of investments today. You may know Kava, back in Boston, Tate, Life Alive, a bunch of other businesses. And one of the things that we've done is we're generally paying more than we're really trying to pay a living wage and a wage that allows people to sustain and stay there. I personally would give this piece of advice as you think about the restaurant industry or any service industry. The thing to focus on is lowering turnover. The cost of turnover is extraordinarily high because you're training people, you're recruiting people, hiring them and training them. Now, I don't have some belief that you're going to come work in a restaurant company and stay forever. People turn over, they use it as transition. But I don't want people leaving because we didn't treat them right. And so part of the question I want to try to ask, and I don't always have the answer, is how do we treat people right so we lower the turnover as far as we can get it? Certainly far better than our competition. And to me, compensation is one element of it, and it matters if you're not able to feed your kids, but it's not the only element. Part of it is respect, part of it is dignity, part of it actually as a leader is love. Do I connect with people and give them back something that matters to them?
Wonderful. Kimberly says, you have to ask a restaurant guy about COVID.
Yes.
And in particular, now that we're back and operating again, remember Ron has sold Panera, but has an interest in many other restaurants. This you alluded to, but this concept of the big quit that's going on, like why?
The big resignation.
Yeah, how are you going to do this?
You know, I share with you my view on any of these societal factors. Every year running a public company, I'd hear about inflation or wage, or this factor or that factor. I ignore all societal factors. And I'll tell you why. Because like the Great Resignation, because they affect everybody equally. They affect everybody. My job and my belief in myself is I'll figure out a better way to deal with whatever the problem is that comes down the pike. And so my focus is not all those things that I can't control because they're happening to everybody. What I want to focus on is what I can control and how I can actually make a difference against whatever the problem is. So, and I translate it again to the broader question of your life. There's so much in your life you can't control. You guys couldn't control. You had COVID for a year and a half of your college times. You can't control what's going to happen next year. Let it go, right? Focus on the things you can control, make the choices and begin the journey. And then you'll see where the journey takes you. You see what happens. And that's sort of how I hold all these things. I mean, I'm going to go off philosophically for a second. Right? We have this assumption that we know where the world is going, where it's controllable, where it's all going to be here. I'm going to guarantee it isn't going to be the way it is in 5 years and 10 and 20. And none of us know what it's really going to be. And so the question is, as you build your life, to have enough commitment to choose a direction and enough flexibility to not believe you can control everything, but develop your skills to respond to what comes down the pike.
Question from Kevin. You're growing Panera and your stock price is doing great. Everything's going great.
Well, I'm not growing Panera anymore. It's a new team.
We're going back in time.
We're
going back in time.
They're
You're
doing a
growing
fine job.
Panera. Everything's going great. You're watching Starbucks at the same time. Howard Schultz. Are you competitive? Are you jealous? Are you what's your mindset?
In life, there's always somebody who's done better and always somebody who's done worse. I spent my life looking at Howard Schultz's rear end, essentially. All right, he's always been one step ahead of us, and I laugh about it. We're sort of friends, you know. I've known him for 30 odd years. When he had 9 restaurants, I first met him, and you know, we had 4 or 5 croissant shops in Boston. And I could tell you a story, right? And I'd go to bed, and in the 2000s, and I used to say, I just wish I could wake up, and somebody would wake me up and say, Ron, they just announced on the news, it was actually bread that's good for you and coffee that's bad for you. That was like my dream, right? You know, but it never worked out that way. So you deal with what you got. And I'll tell you one other story because it's public knowledge. It was in a set of legal filings. And it's about control and about being able to control the future. So in 2016, Howard calls me up. He says, Ron, I want to come up and see you. Now, he doesn't call me every week, and we see each other occasionally, right? So he flies up to Boston on a Saturday. And generally when people fly up on a Saturday, they have an agenda. I called my chairman of the board and I said, hey, think they probably want to buy us. It'll be interesting. And I went out to meet him at Hanscom. He had a bigger airplane than me. But I went out to meet him at Hanscom. And we sat and we talked for 4 or 5 hours. And over the course of 3 or 4 months, we ended up having a series of discussions about whether Starbucks was going to buy Panera. And I'll never forget, it was Thanksgiving, we were away. I was with one of my board members, and I told him, 3 days from now, Howard is calling me up. I know this deal is a powerful deal. I could see the economic opportunity it would create, and he's going to offer to buy our company. It was Larry was there. And 3 days later, I hop on the phone with Howard, and he says to me, Ron, we've looked at this thing. Our guys have studied it. We can't match your stock price. It's now at $250. We can't match it at this point. And I said, I can't believe it, right? That this was the right acquirer for Panera. I just can't believe that they're going to walk away. And he said, I just can't do it now. I didn't realize that he was stepping down 2 weeks later as CEO. And Kevin Johnson was taking over, didn't want the burden of that. But I didn't understand it at that time. But I felt like, how, like this powerful thing I saw that was right there was going to disappear. 3 months later, I met the folks at JEB. And 6 months later, we completed a deal at $315 a share compared to the $250 that Starbucks would have done the deal at. The point I'm trying to make is sometimes the things that seem the worst to you turn out to be the good things. Sometimes the things that seem so good aren't. You never know. And so again, when the message I'm trying to give you is not to believe that you can control everything, but develop your skills to respond to what happens and what plays out. And sometimes the things that seem the worst actually turn out to be better. And it was actually very fortuitous. And we continue to talk and be friends. I'll end the Howard Schultz piece of this by simply saying, as people have asked me, Howard's gone back for the 3rd time. No way I'm going back.
So this is our last question here, Ron, as we close out. And this has to do with some of the stuff you were picking on me, with me and with business school. But what aren't we teaching in universities today? What aren't we teaching that you think that we should be teaching? You know, what weren't you taught back in the day that you wish somebody would have taught you? Because WashU certainly wants to be a school like that, and a school that's focused on academics for sure and research for sure, but also really setting our graduates up for the future. What should I be teaching that I'm not teaching?
I would start and say a profound understanding of the power of stakeholder capitalism versus simply shareholder capitalism. It's the way of the future. And if we're going to build a better society, we need to be committed to that as a business school, as students. We have to be part of that and not fighting that, or else we're going to destroy the very thing that's given us so much. I'd start there. And then I'd say at a personal level, we've got to help people understand humility, because it's from humility that we're able to learn. And it's that sense that we don't have all the answers. It's not about strength. It's about actually the willingness to learn and grow and to be present in that process.
That's wonderful. Let's thank Ron for being here today. Thank you very much. Let me read this little commercial, and I'm going to thank you. I'm going to thank you again.
Sure.
The Alumni Association encourages you to save the date for our next Wednesdays with WashU event. It's May 25th with New York Times best-selling author Anne Bruchers, the author of Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. So that will be the next one that we do. I think I was watching that movie with the kids the other day. I'll have to double check. I think that I was. But Ron, it was a pleasure having you here today, and we really appreciate you coming back to St. Louis. And I know you're a Boston kid, not a St. Louis kid.
Actually, New Jersey, but
New
I've
Jersey
spent 50
kid,
years in
New
Boston.
Jersey kid, Boston. But St. Louis is very proud of you, and WashU is very proud of you. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.